Hi everyone, and welcome to this session that's on digestion. And it's going to be quite a long video, so make sure you've got your cup of tea and you're sitting comfortably. You can always watch it in parts. But I really wanted to start by explaining what digestion is. So when people talk about having problems with their gut, in order to understand what that really means, I think it's really important. And also I'm quite excited about how clever our body is. But I really want to be able to explain what digestion is, and also the process, and also what the gut is, because I think for a lot of people, the gut is basically the abdomen, and actually the gut is much more than that. And so when you can understand what digestion is and what the gut is, you can then see where problems might arise, and also the common sense things that you can do before you actually get to the point where you need help from someone. So hopefully that you will find the whole digestion and the gut as exciting as I do, and hopefully you'll see why and how clever our body is. So digestion is really the process of breaking food into smaller nutrients that are small enough that they can actually be absorbed across the gut lining and into our bloodstream, so those nutrients can actually then travel around our body to our cells. And our gut is where the process takes place. So the gut is basically one tube that runs from our mouth all the way to our anus, and this tube changes in size, it changes in shape, it changes in length. The lining itself changes as well. The pH changes according to where it is in the gut, but it is just one big tube. And along this tube, there are also organs like the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas that also play a really important role in digestion. So in order for food to move down the gut, we have valves, a bit like doors, that stop food or bacteria from going backwards, and sometimes those valves don't work and that can cause problems. We also have muscles that push the food down, and the most common known movement is peristalsis, which is when you swallow and you can feel the food being pushed down, and it's basically constantly being pushed down our gut until eventually that food is pooed out. Now there's also another process really similar to peristalsis that involves muscles and nerves, and that's called the migrating motor complex, MMC. And that's a bit like a Mexican wave that runs every 90 minutes and basically clears everything through. It just kind of pushes things through, which is a really important part of our digestion. It's very active at night, but it requires the stomach to be empty in order for it to work. So that's when grazing constantly can actually be the reason why we end up with digestive problems. So any problems with that migrating motor complex will ultimately end up with problems with digestion. So we'll kind of come back to that later on. Now, whilst digestion technically starts in the mouth, really it starts even before. It starts outside, and it starts with our senses, which is why mindful eating is so important. It starts when we smell food, when we see food, when we think about food. Then our body starts to produce all of the fluids and the digestive enzymes in anticipation of that food hitting our gut. Our circadian clock also kicks in. So this is the clock that involves day and night, but every single organ, every single cell has its own circadian clock. And our gut, our digestive system has a clock. So the MMC, as I said, is much more active at night, which is why if you're eating at night or you're on night shift, that in itself can cause gut problems. So the circadian clock is kicking in. If we, again, having a routine of eating is really important, because then our body is primed to that routine. Our body loves routine. So when we start to smell, when we start to see food, when we think about food, if we know, oh, it's 12:30, it's nearly lunchtime, I'm having my lunch at 1, that's all part of digestion, because your body is anticipating the fact that lunchtime is coming at 1 o'clock, as an example. So our brain is starting to tell stomach to start to produce the chemicals like hydrochloric acid and enzymes that will start to digest the food that we're about to eat. So eating at the same time, having really good routines, It's really important. Mindful eating, slowing down, relaxing, being present for the food that you're about to eat, looking at the food, smelling the food, slowing that process down is hugely important before you've even put anything in your mouth, in order to get that digestive system raring to go. So that's like number one. You can end up with digestive problems purely because you are not giving your body enough time to prime itself and prepare itself to eat. So if you're someone that grabs food, rushes, that in itself will cause problems with your digestion. Then we start to salivate. So you're seeing the food, you're smelling the food, you're anticipating it's nearly lunchtime, you start to salivate. Now, saliva is also really important for digestion. It contains enzymes that start to break down carbohydrates. So that's what we call chemical digestion. And enzymes are really, it's a bit like a pair of scissors coming along and snipping the food we eat into lots of little bits. And then those little bits are much more easily broken down so that we can then absorb those nutrients. So we have two little glands at the back of our mouth, just inside our cheek, and they squirt saliva out when we eat. And we have two little glands at the bottom of our tongue. So you can see when you look, is a kind of the bit that joins the tongue to the mouth of the floor of the mouth. That basically secretes saliva all the time. And we secrete about roughly a litre of saliva every day, give or take. And saliva is really important. It's really unique to each of us. It's basically made from filtered blood, but it's got other things added. So we have calcium in there to make sure our teeth stay strong. We've got some hormones. We have a little bit of painkiller, just a tiny amount. And that's just obviously because we might scratch the mouth, or we might with the food that we eat. It's all about kind of numbing the pain that we might get from when we're eating food. So it's called opiophine. And there's been some studies to suggest it could also possibly have a mild antidepressant action, and that could be linked to comfort eating, but we don't know yet. It's just it's a theory. We also have a type of mucus called mucin, and that its job is to catch bacteria, because there's a lot of bacteria in our mouth. We've got antibacterial substances to kill off the bacteria that's probably in food or even on our fingers. And we've also got good bacteria in our mouth. So it's the bacteria that should be inside our mouth to keep that balance. So you can end up with dysbiosis in the mouth. And there's some current thinking that a lot of problems with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, could actually be as a result of the imbalance of bacteria, good bacteria and bad bacteria, for want of better words, in our mouth. So we'll actually talk about that later on. There's also, I'll talk about tonsils, because tonsils are also important. So we also have really powerful muscles in our jaw, which allow our teeth to crunch and grind food. We've got tongue. Our tongue is important. So yes, our tongue is it's part of the taste. It has our taste buds are on our tongue. There's also the bumpy bit at the back of the tongue, is also part of our immune system as well. The tongue is really good because it's basically there to kind of round up any stray food, bring it back to the middle so it can be pounded and chewed and ground down. Now, chewing is incredibly important because it makes it easier for us to digest food in our tummy. And then obviously in our intestines. So we don't have teeth anywhere else. There's a reason why we have teeth in our mouth. So I think it was Gandhi who said, we should chew our drink and drink our food. And it's really, really important. So by drinking your food, you're basically chewing and chewing and chewing until your food is liquid before you swallow it. So again, if you're bloated, if you get indigestion, have a look to see, am I slowing down my eating? Am I resting and relaxed before I eat? And am I chewing my food properly? Because it might be that if you're rushing and you're like, and then you're swallowing it whole and it's still food and it's not liquid, that can cause bloating and indigestion. And you don't need any herbs or supplements or medications. You just need to slow down and chew your food properly. So when you're eating, don't add lots of mouthfuls. When you haven't finished what's in your mouth, chew until it's liquid, then swallow it, and then put your next mouthful in. So also there's some I'll talk about this in another session, but we have tonsils at the back, and there is some belief that the tonsils, if our tonsils are sore, if we get any infections in the tonsils, then that can also be responsible for SIBO, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, or even those irritable bowel syndrome symptoms, and also possibly psoriasis. So I will talk about the oral microbiome and tonsil health in the future as well, because they definitely appear to have an association with certainly IBS and SIBO. So you swallow your food, swallow your liquid food, and that travels down your food pipe, your esophagus, and then it goes into your stomach. And your stomach is only about the size of your fist, but it has room to expand to about 2 fistfuls. And we know that fruit, non-carbohydrate type veggies are mainly water, so and obviously micronutrients, your vitamins and minerals, and other nutrients. So they tend to break down really quickly. And also you digested in your mouth, the enzymes particularly start to digest, to snip up and make smaller carbohydrates in particular. So carbohydrates get digested really quickly in our tummy because they've already been partially digested by the saliva in our mouth. So your stomach is really high up. Now, I know some people kind of talk about their tummy, but they're actually touching a lot lower in their abdomen. Your tummy is really, really high up, finishes just below the rib cage. So if you've got bloating or pain under the rib cage, it's going to be your small intestine or your large intestine that you have problems, not your tummy. So your tummy is really quite high, right, kind of almost just underneath your sternum. And it's a weird shape. It's like a J. So when we drink water or fluid, water-based type foods, and they generally move down to the lower part and are digested first. The top part of the stomach can hold food before it moves it down to the bottom part. And stomach acid, your hydrochloric acid enzymes, they're produced and they basically break down the food in your stomach even further. And then your stomach has muscles that churn it up too, which is why it's really important that it's liquid in your mouth, because then it means that the stomach has got less work to do, and it's going to struggle to really mush up and turn something into liquid if it hasn't been turned into liquid in your mouth. So as I said, carbohydrates are broken down really quickly because they've been partially digested in your mouth with your saliva. Proteins are specifically digested in the tummy first, and they take a bit longer. So what that happens is that there are specific enzymes in our stomach, that particularly hydrochloric acid, that actually kind of unfold proteins and then come along and snip the proteins up. So proteins then become like little chains of amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. And then they can be broken down further once they hit the small intestines. And fats really take the longest amount of time to break down in the stomach. And pH is really, really important. So this is your acid or alkaline. So your stomach is very acid. Hydrochloric acid is really acidic, and the pH is anywhere between 1.9 and 2.1. So it's very acidic. Anything out of that range can actually then affect digestion later on. So if it's kind of really alkaline, or if it's not as acidic as it is, that again, you can end up with feeling a bit bloated and uncomfortable. And if it's not acidic enough, it actually affects the digestion in the small intestines, which are alkaline, because you need it to be acid in order for the body to then make the intestines alkaline. So it's like a gradient. So having an acidic stomach is really, really important. So sometimes the biggest issues with the stomach is that you don't have enough hydrochloric acid. So sometimes you can end up with reflux and indigestion, and you think you've got too much hydrochloric acid, and that's why you've got this kind of heartburn, and you take an antacid, or you're put on something like Losec or Omeprazole. And actually that can make it worse because you didn't have enough in the first place. And now you've basically either you blocked it or you've kind of made it more alkaline. So be careful and play around with whether you actually, it's not that it's too acidic, it's not acidic enough. So that's when you might have to have some bitter foods beforehand, can be really helpful. Try some Swedish bitters or bush bitters, gin and tonic. That's an aperitif. In the old days, we used to have aperitifs like a gin and tonic or something bitter, a bitter drink before we ate, in order to get all of those juices being produced. And we don't do that anymore. So have some bitter leaves, a bitter salad beforehand, or try some kind of bitter drink in order to get things moving. The other things that obviously will cause that indigestion is the fact that you've got too much air in your tummy because you've eaten too quickly, or you haven't chewed your food properly, or you've eaten too much in one go, or your meal was too big and you just ate it far too quickly. They can all cause heartburn and gas and bloating, and it's got nothing to do with your acid. So just have a look at how you're eating first before you go to those antacids. So from the stomach goes into the intestine. The mush is called chyme, and it basically is passed into a small tube. So the small intestine is a much smaller tube. So you've gone from the tube from your mouth to your tummy. Your tummy then is like a big pouch, and then it goes back into a very, very small tube. And it looks a bit like a bunch of sausages that are all coiled up. And the small intestine is anywhere between 3 to 7 meters long. However, this is the digestion factory. This is where most of the work happens. And in order for it to work properly, it has to actually be longer, but it can't be longer because it's 3 to 7. So in order for the body, because the body's so clever, what the body has done is it actually increases the surface area of those 3 to 7 meters. And actually, there's lots and lots and lots and lots of folds. So for every millimeter squared, in your small intestine, on that kind of the lining, a bit like a tunnel or a tube, you've got that kind of lining. So for every millimeter squared, you have these little finger-like projections that stick up, and these are called villi. And then the villi have finger-like projections on, which are called microvilli, and on the microvilli, they have these other little projections that look a bit like antlers. And this is all about trying to increase the surface area of the intestine so you can absorb as much nutrients as you can. And if you actually ironed out all these nutrients, ironed out all these little projections, so that you just had one big flat small intestine, they think it would actually be about 30 to 40 meters square. So it's actually really, really big. Now, as soon as food enters the small intestines, our liver and our pancreas start to play a role. So they start to produce digestive juices and enzymes that are involved in digestion. So the pancreas is squirting out specific enzymes that help to break down your carbohydrates and your proteins, and your liver is creating enzymes that help break down fat and bile. So that gets squirted into the chyme, and it's a bit like, these enzymes are a bit like washing up powder. So it's all about breaking, just like if you were doing some washing and you threw washing powder in your washing machine, that basically digests the fat and the protein and whatever it is that's on your clothes. The washing powder has enzymes that basically snip it away and digest what's on your clothes, and then your clothes are all clean. So something similar is happening in the small intestine with the squirting of these digestive fluids that are basically helping to digest further that liquid food that we've now got in our small intestine, breaking it down into smaller particles so that you can actually absorb those nutrients. So there's a brilliant book called Gut by Julia Enders that I highly recommend, and there's a great quote that she has in the book that says that a bite of an apple is no longer a bite of an apple, but it's now a nutritious pulp made up of billions and billions of energy-rich and nutrient-rich molecules. And I love that because that pretty much sums it up. So the small intestine's job is basically to break that pulp down even more so it can get to those nutrient-rich and energy-rich molecules that are so tiny that it can then pass through that lining of the tube into the bloodstream. So each of those finger-like projections that I talked about, they all have blood vessels, and they have further enzymes that live in these little projections as well that further break down the proteins and carbohydrates. And then that can pass through a barrier into the bloodstream. And then from there, all of those nutrients basically go to the liver. So they don't just pass into the bloodstream and then travel around the body. They all go to the liver first. And the liver is like the gatekeeper. And I'll talk about the liver in a minute, because what happens in the liver is really, really important. So now some people might not have enough of those enzymes that live in those projections. These are called brush border enzymes. And that might mean that they end up with an intolerance to specific carbohydrates. So lactose intolerant is basically, lactose is a sugar that's found in milk, in dairy products, and lactase is the enzyme. So, and lactase is one of these little enzymes that live in these little projections. So if you don't have enough lactase, or don't have any lactase, it's really common when you become an adult, then it means that you really struggle to digest dairy products. For some people, they might not have the enzyme that helps them to break down fructose, which is found in lots of fruits and veg and some grains, or maltose. So there's lots of different sugars that you get in carbohydrates. You don't have the enzymes to break it down. So it's a bit like a clogged drain. You can't break it down so that it's small enough to actually be absorbed properly, and that can cause bloating and real discomfort. So as I said, what happens is that when the molecules are tiny enough, they get into the bloodstream, they go straight to the liver. And the liver's fantastic. So the liver basically screens them for any poisons, any toxins, anything harmful, anything dangerous. If they find that, the liver will destroy them. And that's what we call detoxification. It's basically making them safe so that you can basically remove them out of your body when you poop. If we eat too much, then again, the liver will store it. So that's when you can end up with something like fatty liver. So it's usually caused by too much refined carbohydrates, too much fat, particularly poor sources of fat, or alcohol is a specific type of fatty liver. But more people now are having fatty liver that's coming from eating really bad fats and carbohydrates that are not great for us. And we're not burning it off, so the liver stores it, and then the liver becomes fatty, and therefore it can't function very well. So the liver will send off all the nutrients that it says, yep, you're good to go, you're safe. It then puts it back into the bloodstream, and then it's taken to the heart, and then the heart pumps it all around our body to our cells, which is very cool. And the liver is also responsible for fat digestion, makes a substance called bile, which is stored in the gallbladder, and then it's squirted in the small intestine. Now, fat's kind of absorbed and dealt with really differently to carbohydrates and proteins. It's actually sent to the lymphatic system. So that's a whole different topic. I'm not going to go there, but basically the liver deals with that. Then we go to the large intestine. So from the small intestine to the large intestine. And the large intestine is also called the colon. You might have heard that name. And it looks like a giant plump sausage. And this is mainly where our gut bacteria live. Now, the appendix, which I'm sure you've heard of, is attached to the colon. And the appendix is really clever because it's there to monitor, it's part of our immune system. It's there to monitor any kind of foreign bacteria that's not part of our body, doesn't live within us. Anything there that shouldn't be there, it'll attack. If it thinks it's bad and it shouldn't be in our body, it will attack it. But it's really clever because it leaves all the good bacteria alone. So it recognizes what's bacteria that lives within us, it's part of us, and which bacteria is foreigners from outside. And then after, say, if you've got food poisoning, you have a bout of diarrhea, that can flush away a lot of the good bacteria. Then some really recent research shows that the appendix steps in and basically provides backup. So it will make sure that all the good bacteria is reproduced and put back out into the colon. So the appendix is really important. It's more important in countries where you're much more likely to pick up bacteria that's going to give you diarrhea. They think it's less important if you live in a much more hygienic, sterilized world. So if you had your appendix removed, it's not the end of the world, but the appendix is not something that's just there and looks pretty. It actually has a really important role in our gut health. So any food residue that's left over, so everything's been absorbed in the small intestine, that whatever's left then goes into the colon, the large intestine. So fiber is an example, particularly resistant starches. So whatever's left over from your fruit and your veg and your grains that you haven't absorbed, that's kind of the fiber part. Then that's fed on by our good bacteria. And our good bacteria create something called short-chain fatty acids, which are really, really important for our health. So again, I'll talk about that another time because otherwise this will be a very long video. But short-chain fatty acids are extremely important, which is why fiber is so important, so that the bacteria feed on the fiber to make these short-chain fatty acids. The gut bacteria is also really important because it produces vitamin K, it produces a little bit of vitamin B12, B1 and B2, which are all very important for lots of different, clotting, bone health, energy production, really important. So again, if you've got any problems with gut bacteria, any kind of imbalance, that can definitely affect your blood, the health of your blood. It can affect your mood. It can affect bone health. It can affect headaches and migraines. It can make you tired and fatigued as well. So the gut bacteria is very important for our general health. Now, there's some other substances that are absorbed here. So there's a bit of calcium that might have not been absorbed in the small intestine. That will be absorbed in the colon. Water and salt are balanced in the colon. And then everything that's absorbed in the colon, large intestine, also goes to the liver, where the liver will check again and either detoxify or put back into the bloodstream. And then the final few centimeters of the large intestine is the only place where everything just gets absorbed straight into the bloodstream. So there's no kind of checks and balances. And that's why sometimes you would be given a medicine that's called a suppository that is basically pushed into your anus. And that's because it's absorbed quickly, because there's no checks and balances, and doesn't go to the liver. It just gets absorbed straight into the bloodstream. So that's why we have suppositories and why we use them. So then what is left, the waste, basically goes into the rectum, and then we pass it out as poo. So I can actually talk about poo in another session, because poo is a lovely topic, because it's really important. If you look at your poo, it will tell you so much about what is going on in your digestive system and whether it's working or not. So I think it's really fascinating, and you'll see that, you really are what you eat. So that Snickers bar that you have for your afternoon tea will be broken down, and it will be absorbed into the bloodstream and end up in a skin cell on your right buttock. So your right buttock will have skin cells that is made up from that Snickers bar. So think about what you're eating and what it's going to become in your body. So how do you know if you've got poor digestion? Well, basically, if you are aware that you are digesting, then there's a problem with digestion. So you shouldn't experience anything. You shouldn't experience any discomfort. You shouldn't experience any pain. You shouldn't experience any bloating, cramping, loss of appetite, nausea, diarrhea, constipation. You shouldn't be experiencing any of that. If you are, then it needs to be checked, okay? Because you should be able to eat food, digest it, absorb it, and not even know you're digesting. So I'm going to give you my top 10 tips for a healthy digestive system in a second. So, let me know if you've got any questions, if anything has come up that you think that was really interesting, please let me know. And there are certain bits that I've kind of talked about that I'm actually going to talk about a little bit more in future sessions. So my top 10 tips for a healthy digestion are: number one, mindful eating. Now, I know it's a buzzword, and for some people they might roll their eyes, but mindful eating is like number one. Before you take any herbs or supplements or medicines or whatever, mindful eating is number one. So think about, are you using your senses? Are you smelling your food, looking at the food, slowing down? Are you eating sitting down? Are you eating slowly? Time yourself. Maybe you need to double the amount of time that you have. Are you chewing your food until it is drink, until it is liquid? Really, really important. Slow down, be really mindful, relax when you eat as well. It's really important. Brush your teeth, making sure that your teeth and your mouth is healthy. See your dentist regularly. I know they're not necessarily cheap, but dental health, oral health is so important when it comes to digestion. And it might be that the reasons you're having digestive symptoms, further on in your gut, is actually because you haven't taken care of your mouth and your oral microbiome. Get your tonsils checked. If you have any problems with your tonsils, your bad breath or any kind of discomfort, get that looked at, because it could be the tonsils that are actually causing problems as well, because of the bacteria that's in the tonsils. Eat smaller portions or smaller meals. So don't overeat, particularly, sometimes we can be bloated because we've eaten a too big a meal in too short a time. So maybe make your meals a little bit smaller. If you get lots of bloating and you know it's in your tummy, it might just be that it's just too much. And maybe you need to have smaller meals that are spaced out. Rather than having 3 big meals a day, maybe you need to have lots of smaller meals. But in saying that, you need to make sure that you have at least a 2-hour gap between meals so that your migrating motor complex can work. Remember, it only works after 90 minutes if your stomach is empty. So make sure you've got big enough gaps. Don't constantly graze throughout the day. Eat at the same time every day as well. Really important. Part of that circadian rhythm and part of that preparing your brain for a meal is having your breakfast, lunch and dinner at the same time. Your body loves that, and your body will start preparing. Your brain will talk to your tummy and say, yep, get ready, it's nearly breakfast time, or it's nearly lunch time, or it's nearly dinner time. So try and keep to that routine as much as possible. If you can, not easy if you're on night shift, I know, but try not to eat at night, because again, that will affect your migrating motor complex. Make sure you are relaxed when you eat. Stress and digestion do not go together. So it's, again, the number one reason for digestive problems, as well as the eating fast and eating too much and not chewing your food, is usually because of stress. And the reason why we do all of that is because we're stressed and we're busy. You will not be able to digest your food unless you are relaxed. Okay, so that's what we call the rest and digest nervous system. It's really important. So make sure you sit down, have a moment before you eat, use your senses and slow down, and enjoy eating your meal. Don't stress about it. Give yourself that time. It's permission to actually enjoy that meal and not be in a rush and not be thinking about all the other stuff. Put that in a box and deal with it later. Slow down and enjoy your meal. And find ways to deal with your stress so that you're not constantly stressed and that's not affecting your digestion. As I said, consider aperitifs before you eat. Look at things like Swedish bitters or Bush bitters, a bit of gin and tonic maybe now and again, or just a bit of tonic, or just a small amount just to get things moving, or have some bitter greens before you eat your meal as well. Eat plants. Okay, so I'm not saying, everyone should be vegetarian or vegan. I'm just saying we need to eat more plants. The vast majority of us don't eat enough plants. We eat lots of carbs. We might even, eat lots of protein. A lot of women don't eat a lot of protein, but we definitely need to have plants. It's the only place you get fiber from. You're not going to get fiber from a Snickers bar or a burger. You get fiber from plants. Okay, so that's your fruit, your veg, and your grains. And that is fuel for your healthy bacteria. It's so important. A lot of what we call prebiotic foods as well are basically fiber-rich foods. Eat fermented foods if you don't react to them. If you do react to fermented foods, if you react to probiotics, then that's usually a sign that you have bacteria in your small intestine that shouldn't be there, and that can be rectified. So be aware of your body. Really pay attention to what your body likes and what you're reacting to. Make sure you drink enough water. Again, hugely important that you drink enough water. Look at your foods. So I really recommend doing like a diet symptom diary, because if you think you have any problems with food, it's really good to kind of get an idea about what that kind of food is. Remove any aggravating food. What I would say, so some of you might have a carbohydrate intolerance. So you might know that you have a problem with grains, or you have a problem with certain fruits and veg, or you have a certain problem with dairy. Try doing a elimination and challenge diet. And I'm actually doing a course on this, because what I want is for you to be able to work out specifically what the problem is. So rather than just say, let's say I'm not having any dairy, or I'm not having any grains, or I'm not having any legumes, or I'm just cutting out a whole food group because you react to one thing, that's actually not necessarily the best thing. So it might be that you, like, for example, for me, I'm really careful with dairy. So I know that I react to dairy. However, by experimenting and doing an elimination challenge, I know that cow's milk is the thing that causes me problems, but butter and yogurt's fine. A little bit of cheese now and again is okay, but I have a threshold. But cow's milk I cannot have. If I have cow's milk, straight cow's milk, I get horrendous migraines and I get a really bad upset tummy. So I know that there are some dairy I can have, some dairy I can have now and again, and there's some dairy I cannot have at all. But that's better for me to manage that than just to cut out all dairy completely, which may not necessarily be something I want to do. So that's why actually doing a challenge and elimination diet is better, because instead of removing all grains or removing all legumes, it might be that it's just one or two. I struggle to have chickpeas, but I'm fine with lentils and I'm fine with black beans. So it's about playing around and working out what you can have. Maybe there's a threshold, so you can have some, but not lots. And maybe there is some that you can't have at all, but rather than removing a whole food group, it could just be removing those specific foods. And you're only going to know that if you do something like a challenge and elimination. So watch out for that course. And also get tested. If you think something's happening, go to your GP, talk to your GP, contact me or a naturopath or nutritionist and get tested to see if you maybe do have a carbohydrate intolerance. There are ways to check that. You might have SIBO. If you have multiple food intolerances, it could be SIBO. So go and get some advice that you should not have any symptoms when you eat. You shouldn't be bloating, you shouldn't be cramping, you shouldn't have nausea. If that is what you're experiencing, then you can do something about it. It's not normal and there's something you can do. But as you can see, the digestive system starts, well, before the mouth, but from the mouth all the way through. There's lots of issues that can happen along the way and they can be rectified. So really important that we support our digestion, and you can support your digestion through your diet, through what you eat, through enzymes, supporting your body to produce those enzymes. You can also supplement with enzymes if you need to, protecting that gut lining of the tube, making sure that the bacteria that you've got is happy and they're in the right amounts and there's the right type. Making sure that your immune system is happy and supportive, and your nervous system is also happy and supportive, and that stress isn't playing a role in your digestive symptoms. So I'm hoping you're as excited as I am about how clever our body is. You can see all the different parts of the digestive system and all the things that you could do to make sure that it works as well as it could. It's designed to work perfectly. And sometimes we just need to tweak the way we eat, how we eat, what we eat, in order to make sure that it works as well as it is designed to make. So good luck. Let me know how you get on. Please send me any questions or comments about this topic, and I'll see you next time.